Audie Murphy, the sister of Audie L. Murphy, the most decorated hero of World War II.
Audie Murphy was a national hero, a Hollywood actor, and a man respected for his courage and honesty. But despite his calm and reserved nature, there was one person in Hollywood who got under his skin more than anyone else. Who was this man? And why did Murphy's feelings run so strong? Join us as we uncover the story behind the one person Audie Murphy truly hated more than anyone else. Born into hardship, Audie Leon Murphy entered the world on June 20, 1925, in Kingston, Hunt County, Texas. He was born into a family that already knew hardship as a daily companion. His parents, Emmett Barry Murphy and Josie Belle Killian, were poor farmers trying to keep food on the table during the difficult years between World War I and the Great Depression. The family lived in constant poverty. Their home was often short on food, clothes, and basic comforts that many would consider essential. There was no sense of stability. The Great Depression hit rural families like the Murphys the hardest, and they struggled to make ends meet even in the best of times. For young Audie, every day was a lesson in sacrifice and endurance. His father, Emmett, was not a steady figure in the household. He drifted in and out of their lives, sometimes gone for long periods without explanation. When he was present, he did little to shoulder the burden of raising so many children. Eventually, he left for good, abandoning Josie Belle to manage the family on her own. Josie did everything she could. She was strong, resilient, and determined to keep her large family together. But the weight was too much. Audie and his brothers and sisters had to take on grown-up responsibilities from a very young age. There was no time to think about childhood dreams. They worked where they could, doing odd jobs to bring in money or food. Audie himself had to leave school after only the 5th grade. Though he enjoyed learning, the family needed him to earn wages more than they needed him in the classroom. From that point forward, the young boy spent his days in the fields as a cotton picker. The work was exhausting, especially under the Texas sun, and the pay was barely enough to count. He also worked as a farmhand and took on any job he could find to bring home even a little help for his mother. In 1941, tragedy struck in a way that reshaped the course of Audie's life forever. His mother, Josie Belle, passed away. Her death was devastating to him. She had been the heart of the family, the one person who had managed to hold things together after his father's abandonment. Losing her meant losing not only a parent, but also the fragile sense of home and family that still existed. Audie was just 16 years old, and the grief cut deep. With Josie gone, the Murphy children scattered. The family that had already been strained by poverty and absence was now broken apart by necessity. Some of the younger siblings were placed in orphanages or children's homes. Others tried to find places with relatives or friends. Audie, still little more than a boy himself, was left to figure out his own path. And this is where Audie's story starts to shift, from a poor Texas boy fighting to survive to a young man stepping into a war that would change everything. Forged in battle. When World War II broke out, Audie Murphy saw it as both a duty and an opportunity. He was still a teenager, but the war gave him a chance to escape poverty and prove himself. The problem was that the U.S. Army didn't think he was ready. At just over 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing barely 120 pounds, he looked too young and too small for military service. He was rejected at first for being underage and underweight. But Murphy was not the type to give up easily. He kept trying, determined to find his way into the armed forces. Finally, in June 1942, after his persistence and determination wore down the system, he was accepted into the U.S. Army. He was only 17 years old. Once he entered, Murphy threw himself into training with the same determination he had shown in trying to enlist. After training, he was deployed overseas and assigned to Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. His first stop was North Africa, where the U.S. Army was preparing for large operations against the Axis powers. North Africa was no easy introduction. The climate was harsh, with intense heat and disease adding to the stress of combat. But Murphy handled it quietly and effectively. His seriousness and focus made him stand out. He wasn't loud or boastful. But when the time came to act, he was reliable. By July 1943, during the invasion of Sicily, Murphy had already begun earning respect from his fellow soldiers. In August 1944, Murphy played a key role during Operation Dragoon, the Allied invasion of southern France. It was one of the most important campaigns in the later stages of the war, and Murphy's actions stood out. He led attacks, coordinated his men under intense fire, and showed tactical skill far beyond his years. These battles highlighted not only his courage, but also his natural sense of strategy. By this time, he had risen to the rank of sergeant, another sign of how quickly his superiors recognized his value. The following year, in 1945, Murphy made his name in one of the most decisive engagements of the war in France, the Battle of the Colmar Pocket. Here, German forces were fighting fiercely to hold their ground, and the Allies faced brutal resistance. In the middle of this chaos, Murphy showed extraordinary heroism. He personally directed fire against enemy positions, led counterattacks, and refused to back down even when the odds looked impossible. As the war went on, the list of decorations and honors he received grew longer. Murphy accumulated nearly every medal for valor that the United States could give. These included the Medal of Honor, awarded for his extraordinary bravery and leadership during a battle near Holtzwihr, France, where he single-handedly held off an enemy attack while wounded and outnumbered. He also received the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars for gallantry, the Bronze Star, and multiple Purple Hearts for being wounded in combat. His record made him the most decorated American soldier of World War II. And just as the war ended, a whole new chapter opened up for Murphy, one that took him far from the battlefield and straight into Hollywood. From soldier to star. When World War II ended, Audie Murphy returned home as one of the most decorated soldiers in American history. His bravery had made headlines, and his story caught the attention of people far beyond the military. Hollywood quickly noticed him. In 1945, offers began to come his way. Producers and directors saw not only a war hero, but also someone who could bring authenticity to the screen. America was eager for stories about the war, and who better to tell them than a man who had lived through it? Murphy did not have training as an actor, but his real-life experiences gave him something unique. When he stepped onto a film set, he didn't have to pretend to know what combat looked or felt like. He had lived it. This authenticity made him a natural choice for war films. Audiences were drawn to him because they knew his courage was not scripted. Hollywood was filled with professional actors, but Murphy was the real thing, and that gave him an appeal no one else could match. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Murphy began appearing in a number of films, many of them westerns and war dramas. Casting directors often placed him in roles of soldiers or fighters because that was what the public wanted to see. While he never fully embraced acting as his passion, he worked hard to do his best. His calm, straightforward manner translated well on screen, especially in roles that called for quiet strength. The high point of his film career came with To Hell and Back. This was more than just a movie. First, Murphy had written his autobiography of the same title, published in 1949. The book told his story of growing up poor in Texas, serving in World War II, and surviving battles that seemed impossible. Readers were captivated, and the book became a bestseller. Hollywood soon adapted it into a film, and in 1955, Murphy played himself in the movie version. This was an unusual choice, but it paid off. No one else could have portrayed his experiences with the same honesty. On screen, Murphy relived the moments that had defined his life, including his most famous acts of bravery. Audiences responded strongly. The film became one of Universal Pictures' biggest successes of the decade. For many Americans, To Hell and Back was not just entertainment. It was a way of understanding what soldiers like Murphy had gone through. Playing himself gave Murphy credibility that no actor could imitate, and it cemented his place in Hollywood history. Murphy carried with him the invisible scars of the war. He suffered from what was then called battle fatigue, but what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. He had frequent nightmares, struggled with sleeplessness, and was often on edge. These struggles, combined with the pressures of Hollywood life, strained the marriage. After only 2 years, they divorced. Later in 1951, Murphy married again, this time to Pamela Archer. Pamela was not part of Hollywood's fast-paced world. She worked as an airline stewardess, and her down-to-earth nature gave Murphy the stability he badly needed. Their marriage lasted, and together, they had 2 sons. Family life brought him comfort and a sense of normalcy that had been missing for so long. Despite his demanding work schedule and ongoing inner battles, Murphy made an effort to be present for his children. Being a father gave him a purpose beyond acting or public recognition. Still, his fight with PTSD never went away. Murphy struggled with flashbacks and depression throughout his life. He often slept with a loaded gun near his bed, fearing sudden danger even when none existed. He also relied on sleeping pills, which created their own problems. At a time when mental health was not well understood, Murphy had to cope largely on his own. What people saw on the screen was a calm, strong man, but behind the scenes he was dealing with the heavy cost of war every single day. And while Murphy found his place in films, his own code of honor shaped how he judged the people he worked with. And that's where conflict with certain stars began to grow. Cagney versus Murphy. James Cagney was one of the biggest names in Hollywood when Audie Murphy arrived on the scene. He grew up in New York City and made his name playing hard-edged, fast-talking roles that audiences loved. Cagney moved with sharp energy, spoke quickly, and filled the screen with force. Films like The Public Enemy and Angels with Dirty Faces made him a symbol of the tough guy lead. He also had real influence in the business. By the mid-1940s and 1950s, he had power with studios, directors, and casting decisions, and younger actors often felt the weight of his presence. Some people admired his confidence. Others saw it as swagger and, at times, arrogance. Either way, Cagney had a larger-than-life image that followed him everywhere. Against that backdrop, Murphy entered Hollywood as a decorated soldier who had not trained for the stage or the screen. He was quiet in conversation, direct in his words, and not interested in showing off. He wanted to work, do the job well, and go home. This difference in style set the stage for friction. Where Cagney was theatrical and bold, Murphy was restrained and plain-spoken. Where Cagney embraced performance and polish, Murphy valued honesty and a simple way of carrying himself. Accounts from people close to Murphy describe early encounters between the 2 men that left Murphy feeling dismissed. According to these recollections, Cagney addressed him as "soldier boy," not in a friendly way, but with a tone that suggested Murphy did not belong among real actors. Whether Cagney meant it as a joke, a habit, or a put-down is something we cannot prove today. What matters is how Murphy took it. He heard it as condescension. He believed he was being treated like a novelty act, a war hero trying out acting, rather than a peer who had earned a place on set. That feeling cut deep for Murphy. He had survived the Great Depression, fought intense battles in Europe, and carried the weight of trauma and loss. Respect was the center of his personal code. He did not demand praise, but he expected basic dignity. Being tagged as Soldier Boy by a powerful star and sensing that the label came with a smirk pushed every button he had. It told him, in his mind, that Cagney did not value what he had done or who he was. There were also differences in how each man came up in the business. Cagney came from stage work, dance, and theater training. He understood sets, marks, timing, and the rhythm of performance. He knew how to command a scene and how to manage the politics around it. Murphy, by contrast, learned acting on the job. He was cast for his truthfulness and presence, not for technique or schooling. He did his best to follow direction and keep the work clean and believable. These opposing backgrounds fed the gap between them. To Murphy, Cagney's performance style felt loud and showy. To Cagney, Murphy may have seemed unpolished and limited in range. Even if neither man said those exact words, the divide was there in how they carried themselves. People who knew Murphy say that the tension was not always open or explosive. It was often subtle, a tone in conversation, a look that signaled doubt, a short comment that cut more than it needed to. In a town where reputation matters, even small signs of disrespect can shape how others see you. Murphy felt those signals from Cagney, and once he formed that impression, it was hard for him to let it go. He had little patience for people he thought were putting on airs, and he had even less patience for anyone who belittled service members. The contrast between their public images added to the problem. Cagney's on-screen characters were bold, quick, and cocky. He leaned into those qualities because audiences expected them. Off-screen, that strong persona often followed him into rooms and meetings. Murphy, meanwhile, had a public image built on courage and restraint. He spoke plainly about the war and avoided bragging. He wanted his work to speak for itself. When these two styles met, brash theater energy versus quiet military steadiness, neither side had much interest in bending. Murphy also measured people by how they treated others without power. He noticed if someone was kind to crew members, extras, or newcomers. The reports that Cagney treated him like an outsider, even if just in passing moments, confirmed Murphy's belief that the star looked down on him. Once that belief took hold, Murphy's opinion hardened. He did not vent in public, but in private he was clear. He had no time for what he saw as pretense, arrogance, and small jabs disguised as jokes. It is important to say that not everyone in Hollywood saw Cagney this way. Many colleagues praised his professionalism and craft, but Murphy's view was personal and formed from his own experiences. He felt the sting of being minimized. He believed he had earned respect the hard way, and when he sensed it was withheld or replaced with a mocking nickname, he drew a line. From that point on, Cagney stood in his mind as the face of a culture in Hollywood that valued image over respect. Everything he hated. Audie Murphy was not quick to hate people. He had seen enough hardship and death to know that holding grudges could be a waste of energy. But when it came to James Cagney, Murphy's feelings were unusually sharp. To him, Cagney stood for everything he disliked about Hollywood, and the kind of behavior he could not forgive. One of the first reasons Murphy disliked Cagney was the way he treated people who didn't come from the traditional acting world. Cagney had risen to fame through theater, dance, and film, and by the time Murphy arrived in Hollywood, Cagney was already an established star. With that status came power, and Murphy believed Cagney used it in ways that made others feel small. For Murphy, this was more than just personality differences. He had never studied acting. He hadn't spent years climbing through auditions or learning the craft on stage. Instead, he was brought into the industry because of his reputation as a war hero. While some respected that, others saw him as an outsider. According to Murphy, Cagney was one of the loudest in showing disdain. Calling him Soldier Boy was not just a name, it was a way of telling him he didn't belong. Murphy felt the sting of that remark deeply, especially since service in the military was the very thing that defined him. Cagney's reputation for arrogance only added to the problem. He was known for his confidence, his swagger, and his ability to dominate a room. Many admired it, but Murphy saw it as condescension. He disliked Hollywood's elitist circles, where established stars looked down on those who hadn't paid their dues in the usual way. To Murphy, respect should come from character and actions, not from pedigree or background. Murphy also had a professional criticism of Cagney. He thought his acting was too staged, too repetitive, and not grounded in real experience. Cagney had built his career playing tough guy roles. The quick-talking gangster became his trademark. Audiences loved it, but Murphy wasn't impressed. He once said that Cagney played the same role in every picture, with the same mannerisms and the same mugging expressions. Perhaps the most powerful factor behind Murphy's dislike was Cagney's lack of military service during World War II. Murphy never made a career out of judging those who didn't serve. He knew not everyone was fit or able to fight. But for men who could have served and didn't, Murphy's judgment was harsh. Cagney, for various reasons, was not part of the armed forces during the war. While he did not avoid service illegally, he remained in Hollywood while others fought overseas. During that time, rumors also spread about his alleged ties to communist sympathizers. Though he was eventually cleared by the House Un-American Activities Committee, the questions about his patriotism lingered. For Murphy, who had fought in Europe, lost countless friends, and endured wounds and trauma, this was unforgivable. He once said, "I didn't care how famous he was. All I knew was he wasn't there when it mattered." That one sentence explains his mindset. Fame meant nothing to him compared to sacrifice, and anyone who had not been part of that sacrifice, especially someone who looked down on those who had, earned his lifelong disdain. On top of everything else were the personal slights. Being called Soldier Boy might have seemed minor to others, but to Murphy, it was more than a nickname. His service was his pride, his identity, and his greatest burden. He had suffered for it, and he had bled for it. To hear it used as a put-down, especially by someone who had not served, was something he could not forgive. These insults stayed with him. They weren't isolated moments. They became symbols of what he thought Cagney stood for. To Murphy, Cagney represented arrogance, phoniness, and disrespect toward veterans. That combination hardened his feelings over time, until his dislike turned into outright hatred. For a man like Murphy, who usually avoided Hollywood feuds, this level of bitterness was unusual, but it showed how seriously he took respect, authenticity, and service. Hatred that endured. Audie Murphy was not known for getting caught up in Hollywood drama. He wasn't the type to start feuds or spend his time bad-mouthing colleagues. Most of the time, he kept his opinions private and focused on his work, his family, and his commitment to veterans. But James Cagney was the exception. Unlike with other actors, Murphy's dislike of Cagney was not temporary or mild. It was deep, personal, and long-lasting. For the rest of his life, he never softened his feelings about him. Murphy rarely aired personal grievances in public, but he made no secret of his hatred when talking to those close to him. To trusted friends, he was blunt. "I hated him more than anyone in Hollywood," Murphy admitted more than once. For a man who usually kept his circle small and loyal, this was a powerful statement. He didn't speak in exaggerations, and he didn't waste words. If he said he hated someone, it meant the feeling ran deep. What made his stance even clearer was his refusal to praise Cagney, even when others did. By the 1950s and 1960s, James Cagney had already been recognized as one of Hollywood's greats. Critics, filmmakers, and fellow actors spoke of him as a legend, praising his influence on film and his unforgettable performances. Murphy, however, would not join in. When the topic came up, he either changed the subject or gave short, dismissive responses. If pressed in private, he would explain exactly why he had no respect for the man. This was unusual for Murphy, who rarely let personal feelings interfere with his public image. He was careful not to speak badly about others, unless he had a very good reason. His unrelenting position on Cagney showed just how personal the dislike was. It was not about professional rivalry or jealousy, it was about values. Many disagreements fade with the years, especially in Hollywood, where yesterday's rivalries often become forgotten memories. But Murphy's disdain for Cagney never weakened. If anything, it grew stronger with time. Even after decades had passed, Murphy remained firm in his judgment. To him, Cagney wasn't just an actor he disliked. He became a symbol of everything Murphy thought was wrong with Hollywood: arrogance, phoniness, and a lack of respect for true service. While others continued to celebrate Cagney's body of work, Murphy kept his distance from the praise. He did not separate the man from the actor. For him, the off-screen arrogance and the on-screen style were linked, and together they represented a Hollywood culture he could not stand. This lack of forgiveness was rare for Murphy. He didn't enjoy carrying grudges, and he often preferred to ignore people he didn't like rather than dwell on them. But with Cagney, the bitterness was constant. No matter how much time passed, the insult of being treated as a soldier boy and the knowledge that Cagney had not served in World War II stuck in his mind. These things could not be undone, and Murphy never let them go. And as the years went on, Murphy carried that resentment with him, right up until his tragic and untimely death. Bitterness to the end. By the 1960s, Audie Murphy's Hollywood career had started to slow down. He was still a recognizable name and continued to act, but the golden years of starring in major studio films were behind him. Instead, Murphy often appeared in westerns and low-budget productions, sometimes called B-movies. These films gave him steady work, but did not bring the same attention or box office success as To Hell and Back or his earlier projects. Murphy wasn't the type to complain about slipping fame. He accepted the work for what it was, gave his best effort on set, and moved forward. Outside of acting, Murphy began to shift his focus to other parts of life. His family became increasingly important to him. With Pamela Archer, his second wife, he had 2 sons, and he valued the chance to give them the stability and care he had missed in his own childhood. He was not always at ease because of the lingering effects of post-traumatic stress, but he worked hard to be present for them. His children gave him joy and purpose, even when the pressures of Hollywood or the shadows of war weighed on him. Despite these positive parts of his life, there were also challenges. Murphy faced financial problems from poor investments and gambling debts. He continued to struggle privately with his mental health. The trauma of war never left him, and though he kept working, those close to him knew he carried a heavy weight. Through it all, he stayed committed to his family and to speaking up for veterans, which gave him a sense of purpose even in difficult times. Tragedy struck on May 28, 1971. Murphy was a passenger on a private plane traveling near Roanoke, Virginia. The weather conditions were poor. Rain, fog, and low visibility made flying dangerous. The plane crashed into the side of a mountain, killing all on board. Audie Murphy was just 45 years old. His death shocked both the military community and Hollywood. For many Americans, it felt as though the country had lost not just a decorated soldier, but also a symbol of courage and perseverance. Even in the final years of his life, Murphy's feelings about James Cagney never changed. Friends who spoke with him recalled that his disdain remained as strong as it had ever been. Unlike other feuds that fade over time, Murphy's dislike of Cagney never softened. It was as if every slight, every insult, and every principle that had been violated stayed alive in his memory. Murphy's hatred of Cagney was not about envy or career rivalry. It was about principles. He despised what he saw as arrogance without sacrifice, performance without truth, and fame without respect. While Hollywood continued to celebrate Cagney as one of its greatest legends, Murphy carried a very different view, one rooted in his own experiences of hardship and war. Audie Murphy's life was cut short, but his strong feelings about James Cagney show how deeply his values guided him, right until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Hollywood stories.